All right, so welcome everybody to An Evening with Farzana Doctor. Tonight, this conversation marks the North American launch of The Beauty of Us, Farzana's seventh novel. First, a little bit about City Books. We are Pittsburgh's oldest existing bookstore, founded in 1984, and we celebrated our 40th anniversary on August 10th. Originally founded on the south side of the city, I bought the shop in 2015 and we moved to Pittsburgh's north side. We are surrounded by museums and galleries and cafes and restaurants. So I know that you are spread out all over the continent, but if you ever do make it to Pittsburgh, there is plenty to see and do. We acknowledge that our small business operates on the traditional lands of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Seneca Nation, and the Lenape people, who have stewarded these riversheds for generations. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present. We recognize their enduring presence and honor the connection to this land that remains vital to their cultural heritage. We also support the ongoing work of Indigenous communities and organizations in Pittsburgh to promote and protect Indigenous rights, cultural preservation, and well-being. We commit to fostering an environment of respect, awareness, and inclusivity, standing in solidarity with the Indigenous peoples who value this watershed and concede that as readers and writers, we owe a debt of gratitude to the nations who came before us, without whom a literature of the Americas would not exist. Farzana Doctor is a writer, activist, psychotherapist who has been writing her whole life. Her first novel, Stealing Nasreen, was published by Inanna in 2007. Her second novel, 6 Meters of Pavement, won a 2012 Lambda Literary Award and was shortlisted for the 2012 Toronto Book Award. Her third novel, All Inclusive, was a National Post Best Book of the Year. I discovered Farzana after her fourth novel, Seven, which I finished while I was on vacation and I think reviewed it and tagged her in it almost immediately. Seven was chosen as the Amnesty International Reader's Choice and was shortlisted for the Trillium and Evergreen Awards. She writes poetry and nonfiction with great skill as well. Her poetry collection, You Still Look the Same, was published in 2022, and earlier this year, 52 Weeks to a Sweeter Life was published, a workbook for activists and helpers, which speaks to anyone who struggles to pause, set boundaries, and take care of their own needs. Before we get going tonight, Cassie from ECW Press wants to say a few words.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us tonight in celebrating Farzana's launch for The Beauty of Us. My name is Cassie Smythe, and I'm the audiobooks manager and a publicist at ECW Press. I count myself so lucky that I've had the opportunity to work with Farzana in both capacities of my job. First, in producing the audiobook for her poetry collection, You Still Look the Same, a few years ago, and second, now in promoting her new book, The Beauty of Us. This book is Farzana's first foray into the world of YA, and what incredible strides she has taken. Her characters and their experiences are so grounded and realistic as they embark on the challenging task that is teenage girlhood in the 1980s. I imagine it must be challenging to circle back and place yourself in a youthful mindset without either glamorizing it or demonizing it, depending on your own personal experience. But Farzana has walked the line with both integrity and honesty. I was speaking with Farzana's editor, Pia Singal, today, who is sorry she couldn't be here, but she wanted me to pass along some words on her behalf. I acquired The Beauty of Us because it reflected the complexities of teenage girlhood with candor and beauty. I wasn't used to seeing such a complex portrayal of third culture kids, and especially not in YA. I was really keen on supporting Farzana's vision of bringing that experience to today's YA readers. So, congratulations to Farzana for realizing that vision. ECW is so happy to have supported you on your journey, and we are so thrilled to see The Beauty of Us out in the world.
Thank you so much.
Off to you.
Thank you so much, Cassie, and thank you so much, Arlen. I have a few thank yous before I wanted to get started with the program today. So just a big thank you to everybody at ECW. There were so many people who had a finger in this book. There's so many different tasks involved in producing a book. So there's so many people there. And I want to say a special thank you to my agent, Rachel Latofsky, who is at McDermott. And a huge thanks to Arlen at City Books and Patrick for being our 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 bodyguard to make sure that any trolls who come in get thrown out. That hasn't happened for a long time, right? The last time I remember that happening was in 2021. So I hope we're beyond that. And I want to thank all of you who are here to celebrate with me today. I know that people are from all over the continent, and that's so lovely. I want to thank my friends and family who have done so much to help me as a writer, to promote the work, to spread the news. And I want to say a special thank you to my partner, Rayan, who helps me in every single way. So those are my thank yous. Oh, Arlen, you're muted.
I muted myself when you were talking. Okay. So, Cassie and you and I have both spoken in the past several weeks and months about The Beauty of Us being a YA novel. Yet these young characters are dealing with some very adult issues. What drew you to Nala and Zahabia and Lisa, and whose story do you think it is?
Yeah. So, I think that young people are dealing with so many adult issues. So I think it is a young adult book, but I think the adults in the room will also find it interesting. I'm thinking it's going to be maybe a crossover novel.
Mm.
What drew me to writing YA or giving it a shot was that I as a writer, I really like to stretch. I've written in various genres, and I was just very interested because the subject material was inspired from a time in my own youth. I thought that this might be a good candidate for trying out YA. And it was a challenge. There were lots of things I needed to learn and to tweak in my own writing to make it work. And what was the last part of your question? Who is?
Whose story do you think it is? Because I think all of the girls change. And
Yeah.
usually when I'm identifying whose story it is, usually the character who changes the most. But I think all of these characters change.
Yeah, I think it's so for folks who don't know, the book is told in alternating perspectives of these three different characters. And I do think it's all of their stories. They've got some similarities in what they're working through. There are, themes around violence and sexuality and autonomy, um, home, all of that stuff. So they're all working through all of that, I think. So I hope it's all of their stories.
You said that the inciting incident for you to decide to write the book was something that you had encountered in the 80s. And I'm wondering, do you think it's easier to talk about that subject matter now, 40 years later? I'm going to have a class reunion soon. So now, I mean, it seems like after the Me Too movement, for example.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's always easier so all of my books start with something that is a little bit of me and then heads off into bigger fiction. It seems to be the way that I enter stories.
Where?
And so I think that I think that it is
It's been there all.
So definitely it's easier to do that. Like when I compare thinking about some of these characters to writing Seven, which was material that I was dealing with at the time of writing. Holy crap, this is so much easier because of all of the time that has passed. But the inciting incident, just so people know, is things were a little rough in my family. Some of the family members here will know that around the time that I was 15, and the way that I handled it in my 15-year-old creativity and nonsensicalness was that I applied to boarding schools and I got in one and I eventually went. And so the setting of The Beauty of Us is very much inspired on that boarding school that I went to for that one weird year. And some of the secondary characters are also inspired by some of the friends that I made there. So that's the part that's not fiction, or that is the inciting event that gets the fiction flowing from there. The rest, you had asked this question, Arlen, as some of the earlier you had asked, like, did some of the harder stuff that happens later on the book that the reader understands, did that happen? That didn't happen to me, and from what I understand, that didn't happen at the school. Although it's a prevalent enough issue that it could have happened anywhere.
Yeah. I don't even remember Title IX being a thing when I was in high school, which in the US is the thing that legally prevents teachers and staff members and subordinates, even if they work together, from having situationships. I mean, I do think Title IX happened in the 70s, but I don't remember. I mean, having been a professor, and my husband is still a professor, you have workshops before the start of every fall term reminding you what you are and you're not allowed to do and how to look out for it with your colleagues. And I think that makes the book very, very timely. And you mentioned crossing boundaries, and I think not only does the storyline itself cross boundaries, but as a result, then the book does too. Is it young? Is it adult? Because Nala is an adult character. I mean, she is in her 20s, but she's a young teacher dealing with this for the first time. There are also other elements in the story, like there's a little bit of magical realism. Why did you decide to include that in the book?
I really love magical realism. I love ghosts. All of my novels have had some magical realism and some ghosts. For people who will remember, for example, like All Inclusive has a ghost character who's quite present. Seven and 6 Meters of Pavement have little elements of ghosts coming in and out. And here there is a ghost. She's kind of a character, but not. She's mostly influencing Nala. And I don't know if you noticed, but like each of the sections, there's three sections to the book, and each of the sections has this box and some words inside it, and those are the ghost's words.
Yeah, I did notice that. I mean, I read the ARC, or the digital version of it. Yeah, I think I did remember that they obviously were hers. Do you want to read a little bit from the book as we go along, as opposed to saving it all up at the end?
I think so. I think it's better for people.
Sure. Okay, so how about the first selection?
Okay, so the first selection, I'll do Zahabia first. Zahabia is a 15-year-old turning 16, and this is fall term. I'm going to only read from fall term, September 1984, and this is Zahabia. Flushing! I turned over and away from the sunshine that pierced through the drapes. Had I dreamt the scream? When the second flushing drilled through the wall, this time in a higher pitch, I realized the yelling wasn't just in my head. What the fuck? May grumbled from 4 feet away. May is a big cusser. She told us it would be convenient to live beside the washrooms. She was full of crap. I sat up, put on my glasses, pushed my bangs away from my eyes. That bitch. Lisa, our roommate for a day, had convinced us to move out of the upstairs triple dormer and into the first floor double next to the washrooms. I'd felt bad for her when she asked us to switch with her two best friends so they could room together. May and I were strangers to her. Flushing! Maybe she didn't realize. I stared at the wall that separated us from the shrill shouting on the other side. Don't be naive. She knew. She set us up. May stretched her long arms over her head and whacked the wall with an open palm, her toes almost touching the twin bed's footboard. Right at that moment, a bell rang, the dorm's collective alarm clock. Should we try to talk to someone? Our parents are paying a lot for this. I gestured at the cracked plaster walls, scratched mahogany wardrobes, and warped-looking window, a room bruised by a century of living. I dismissed my own words almost as soon as I'd said them. My father wouldn't care about my complaints. He was still mad that I'd ambushed him. To get to Thornton College, I'd gone to the library, searched its collection of Ontario yellow pages for boarding schools, requested application forms, and filled out 6. When I presented him with Thornton's acceptance letter, he was shocked. And here's May again. My parents won't give a shit. They wiped their hands clean of me when they dropped me off in that driveway. Before I could ask her what she meant, May bounced off her bed and leaned her head out the door, yelling, "Shut the fuck up! Take it easy," a girl shouted from the washroom. "It's to warn the girls in the shower so they won't get scalded." I stared up at the ceiling's swirly patterns. "Great, this shithole has old shitty plumbing too," May shot back, her voice like a foghorn through the thin wall. I'd need to distance myself from May. I wanted to start the year off well and actually make some friends. At my last school, I'd always been on the outside of things, a product of being a year younger than everyone in my classes after skipping grade 5. That had marked me as just a little more different in a small town where I was already so different. I swung my legs out of bed and opened the dust-streaked window. A black squirrel ran up the trunk of a nearby oak. He had a distinctive light gray stripe down his tail. May returned to our room, slamming the door behind her. "Coming here might have been a mistake," I said, still looking outside. The squirrel leapt to a branch closer to my window. He stood on his back legs and stared at me. I tapped on the window and he ran off, probably scared. So that's Zahabia's first little bit.
I love that little squirrel who reappears throughout the book. I thought that was a really great beginning to the book, as it hits you right away with their voices, like literally and figuratively. Did you have any challenges writing the book, whether in form or content, of
Yeah.
getting all those voices on the pages at the same time?
Yeah, there was a lot of editing work to get the voices to be distinct from one another, because there's the 3 main characters and all these secondary characters. And then one of the issues that my editor talked a lot about with Zahabia was that initially she felt too young. She sounded more 13 than 15, which is like a difference, right? And so I needed to figure out how to work with her internal voice a little bit more to age her up a little bit. With Lisa, who I'll read later, I needed to, she's like the mean rich girl at the school. And I needed to figure out a way to just bring more empathy and compassion and nuance to her character. And then with Nala, who is that young teacher, I had the least trouble with her because she is more adult. But one of the pieces of advice that I got from a workshop years ago about writing YA is that you want the youth characters to be kind of at the center of solving all the problems, identifying and solving the problems. So I needed to make sure that Nala was backed up from that she had to be just a little bit more clueless about things, and she needed to be the one the students came to with the problems for her then to take some action. But initially she was like peripheral to solving things.
I've always had a really hard time describing to my customers what YA is and what YA isn't and where the lines are. Because if I have a parent come in with a 10-year-old, I mean, there are no two 10-year-olds that are reading the way. I mean, some could be reading at an 8-year-old level and some could be reading at a 16-year-old level. And you certainly don't want the more youthful ones to be reading certain content. But I mean, when I was 12, I was reading Flowers in the Attic. I was reading Judy Blume, which I don't think children would necessarily read today. So I used that description. You and I had talked about that last week. I used that description to a young 12-year-old girl who came in who was looking for a book. And I said, so these are the books that are going to be more young person focused and then solving them solving the problems. And she gravitated towards that.
It is
So
a hard thing to figure out, I think.
yeah.
Very much a marketing decision too, like whether it's going to be like a younger young adult versus an older young adult. From what I understand, Cassie, you might have a different understanding, but like I think that this is a marketing choice, and maybe people like parents might just have to figure out like how mature is their 12-year-old for this book.
Parents should absolutely be involved in that decision-making process. I agree. So you're talking about how you wanted all their voices to sound different, and for Lisa in particular, as a child of the 80s who grew up with all the John Hughes movies, I really did not have a time visualizing Lisa at all. She was always that kind of snotty one that dated James Spader. I mean, that's how I saw her in my head. You know, she was easy to characterize. And so I'm wondering about the other 80s elements that you drew into the story, because when the subject matter gets heavy, there's always this, for me, there was this element, there's an 80s detail, there's an 80s clue, and that kind of brought some light to the shadows. Even with the magical realism, it brought some light to the shadows, and I think that balance was really helpful. So 80s because of personal experience, or did you just find that something you
Yeah,
gravitated to?
I just gravitated to it because I was a teen in the 80s too, right? So um I just went there and hoped that it would work. It was just, you know, a lot of fiction decisions, at least in the early stages of the writing, is feeling it out and seeing what you feel works. So yes, 80s, and you know, it was also my 80s that I'm writing about. So the music, some of the films, some of the fashion, it's all in there.
And it gives you cover as well, I think, as an author who's writing in the 2020s, knowing what we've learned since then, to kind of think of the kids, young people back then might not have realized what was okay and what wasn't okay, and how far,
Yeah.
what the adults could do for them and how to ask for help.
Yes. And I think
Yeah.
that can happen, right? Like if you're a young person who is in a dangerous situation, but you don't know that it's a dangerous situation because it's just your life, you might also have difficulty, even though there's so much more conversation. I mean, we have so much more discussion about all kinds of life stuff on social media, as an example,
Mhm.
maybe in TV and movies. But still, when it's you who is having the hard time, I think it's really it's hard to figure out how to talk to people.
Oh yeah, and Lisa never really, it takes Lisa a long time to figure out how to talk to people,
Mm.
even to question herself. So you said like you sort of feel things out as you go
Mhm.
in your style of writing. Are you somebody who plots everything out before you begin to write, or do you just let the characters tell you what they want to do and you just meander where the word takes you?
More the second. But what I like to have is at least a feeling for what the arc is going to be. So I want to know in general, like, how is this supposed to end so that I know where I'm driving to?
Mhm.
I might end up, you know, going off on all the side streets and having all these detours and then having to like edit all that detour out at some point. But I want to generally know what the destination is so that I'm going in the right direction at least. But it is very organic.
That's great. I can't do that.
Mm.
I have to know exactly where I'm going every second, every paragraph. I have to know. Would you like to read something else?
Yeah, let me read Lisa next because we've just been talking about her. And again, same time period. So this is day 2 of school, and it's the dining hall. Lisa took her seat at table A3, the meal hall assignation pleasing her when she saw that Jason Anderson had the place across from her. He smiled deep dimples at the girl beside him, probably a 9th grader. Lisa watched his dark eyes twinkle, like the way his brown hair had a tinge of red as though an amber light shone from behind him. She'd noticed him last year when he'd started at Thornton College. He was one of the brains. She admired the way he could articulate himself with confidence. In classroom debates, he answered teachers' questions well beyond the scope of the textbook's material without being boring or arrogant. She often tried to add a caboose to his train of thought, after which he'd nod to her in reply. The smart kids and her crowd rarely mixed, but it could be fun to flirt with him at mealtimes, to have an admirer her own age for a change. While she'd always been part of the elite circle, she'd never been close to its apex until last year. Jessica and Mallory, girls she'd known since grade 7, had only shown her a polite friendliness. But last spring, their best friend, Ashley, sprained her ankle, and too slow on crutches to keep up with them, Lisa had been invited to take Ashley's place in the trips to town or for ice cream. She'd worried that Ashley would reclaim her position after the summer once her injury healed, and she'd be back to where she'd started. But a stroke of luck had secured her spot. Jessica and Mallory were assigned the cruddy room beside the downstairs showers, and she had the upstairs triad. She was perfectly poised to save them. She convinced the Indian girl and that Chinese girl to switch with Jessica and Mallory without any trouble, and they'd shown their gratitude by sharing their stash of Marlboros and flask of rum behind the building in the spot just out of reach of the motion sensor lights and prying eyes of the residence monitor. They quieted their boozy laughter when the new French teacher slid open her second-floor window to light her own cigarette. Lisa spied Zahabia and May hesitating near the dining hall doors like lost puppies. By now, they'd have figured out that the downstairs double sucked. Too bad. She'd been a new girl once herself and had to learn things the hard way. She turned her attention back to Jason Anderson. Did you hear that Mademoiselle Leblanc passed away? She fluttered her eyelashes mournfully at him. Shocking, right? She had such a big heart. Sorry, pun not intended. Were you close to her? His brown eyes were wells of concern. She was like family. If he'd reacted with indifference, she might have shared her real opinion. She was a second mom to me. The 9th grader beside him wiped her tears. Yeah, Lisa nodded, drawing the attention back to herself. I was probably in her apartment at least once a week when I first came to Thornton. Lisa remembered the smell of Mademoiselle Leblanc's flat, a mix of anai and coffee, the sense memory so strong it was like the woman was sitting next to her. Sad way to begin the school year. Here, Mimi. He passed the girl beside him his napkin. A cowbell clanged, and Jason sighed and headed to the kitchen. Each student took turns being the table's waiter. Lisa counted her own way around the table of 12, calculating that it wouldn't be her turn until lunch on Wednesday. Lunches weren't usually that bad, except when they served carrot soup, vomit-colored droplets of it splashing onto her hands as she ferried its tureen from kitchen to table. She'd complained to her mother, a class of 61 old girl, who agreed that the traditional chore was antiquated and menial. She'd promised to send a stern letter of protest to Headmaster Lowry, but who knew if she ever would. Lisa surveyed the dining hall and spotted Jessica at A4 and Mallory at A2, good locations for being able to bring them extra Johnny cakes or meatballs when she was waiter. But Ashley was at B3, also just one table over. Keep your friends close and your rivals closer, Lisa thought.
Mm. That was our first introduction to Lisa, right?
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah. It took me a while to get my mind wrapped around what kind of character she was. I liked her. I mean, by the end, I really liked her a lot. I really felt a lot of sympathy for her.
Mm.
There's so many different kinds of characters in the book, nationalities, diverse voices. How did you manage juggling all of that? You know, writing in and out of the characters that you were most familiar with.
Yeah. So that was also inspired by that school that I went to. It was a school that I guess did a lot of outreach to lots of different countries. So a lot of the students were um, kids of color. So at least half, I think. And that was so different from anything I'd experienced growing up in a small Ontario town. And then in terms of writing different identities, I've always wanted to do that. You know, my own community is a mix of so many people, and for me, that's real life. And sometimes fiction doesn't depict that well enough, in my opinion. So I really like to see such a diverse range of, race, class. There's not so much gender identity in this book, but also like sexual orientation. All of that I feel needs to be in these books. So some of it I just write, and some of it I make sure that I have beta readers for. Rayan was my beta reader for Nala, the Lebanese character. Um, if I don't know if Sherry is in the room here, but Sherry Vensicle was a sensitivity reader
So
for
for those people who don't know what a beta or a sensitivity reader is, do you want to explain that?
yeah, so those are people who read in advance and give you feedback and tell you how you've messed up, give you suggestions. And sensitivity readers are specifically ones that people you get when you're writing people of other identities. So Sherry was my sensitivity reader for Marie's character, who is Indigenous. And then I also had two people who went to that boarding school as well. My friend Danya Sands, and also let me just make sure I'm not forgetting anyone. Miriam Hookings was also there, and she helped me with some of those memories. So, that was very important for me to make sure that I wasn't delving too far into stereotypes and just kind of
Yeah.
getting.
Yeah.
Secondary characters are not super deep, right? Like you can't portray them in the same way that you're going to be portraying with a primary character protagonist. You're really getting pretty deep, and so you have to be a little cautious with your secondary characters that you're not writing stereotypes or caricatures.
In the past, because you've written so many different kinds of books, I always describe myself as a mood reader, and you kind of seem like a mood writer as well. Have you found that your audiences have reached out to you to talk about your characters or to talk about your books? How do you engage with your audience? I mean, do you engage with your audience?
Yeah, definitely people will reach out, and they say nice things about how they related to the work. How I remember with Seven, I got quite a few people saying that they found it healing. I
Mm.
was talking about traumas that they hadn't maybe addressed yet in their lives. So I like that. I don't get too many, so I appreciate when they come in. I think that some writers feel a bit flooded, and then they have to kind of find a way to cut it off or write a form letter reply. But I generally reply to people who are engaging with me in a meaningful way, and I like it because, it's a very lonely thing to be a writer sometimes, and you just never know how the work is reaching people, and so it's lovely to hear from people.
And now we have social media. I mean, that's how we connected. That wasn't how I discovered you. I mean, the book was how I discovered you, but we connected via social media. And you are on Instagram, you are on TikTok. Um, and yeah, writing can be a very isolating and lonely business, but now we have these tools to connect. And do you ever find that it takes away from the writing time?
Yeah, it can if you're not careful, because it is a huge time suck. And um, it's also so the writing is this very like it's this process that is very individual, and you're in your head and you're just kind of doing your creative work. And then social media, and when you put out the book into the world, it's this very public thing. And it's very different from other kinds of work where you're being evaluated by a lot of people. This work that started out just in your own head and body becomes evaluated, and people are commenting. And so it can be a place, social media can be a place where if you spend too much time there, it can feel a little corrosive. But then there's also these moments where people are very kind. And when, people like you will, do a TikTok review of a book, I will always write back and say, thank you so much for taking the time to do that. Because that's a real service. So it's both things. It's good and bad.
Do you
Yeah.
find that your readers want you to stay in with one particular genre? Like, because now you've written in every genre, fiction, nonfiction, poetry. Um, do you feel like you want to write another collection of poetry, or do you want to write another nonfiction book, or do you feel safest, emotionally speaking, in fiction, or do you find that your readers want to hold you, or do you want to pigeonhole yourself?
I've never felt any kind of pressure from readers to do anything in particular, so that's nice. For me, I think it's all wide open. I am very comfortable with fiction. I'm very comfortable with the novel as a form. I feel like competent there, whereas my collection of poetry was my first collection of poetry, so I felt like a baby. Um, and then with the nonfiction, it was all like kind of new as well. So I am very comfortable with fiction, but I'm open to seeing what will happen. I'm writing poetry again, so we'll see what happens.
Hey, good for you.
Mm.
So let me say before we go too much further, if there's anybody who's watching who has any questions that you want to ask Farzana, pop them in the chat now so we can see them and filter through them and maybe pick some of them in advance, before we get too much further along. It's because we're heading now toward the top of the hour. Um,
Should
so
I Nala right now? Should I
yeah,
jump in?
yeah. Well, yes. Go ahead. Let's start to read Nella, and then I'll ask some final questions. Sure,
This is just a 3-minute little
we're
bit.
good. It's about quarter till 17 till.
Okay, so just as a reminder, Nala is she's the teacher, the French teacher who has replaced uh, the other French teacher who has been referenced already. She's the ghost. She's replaced the woman who is now the ghost. And this is her very first teaching gig. And here she is talking to the administrator. I am so sorry this is so rushed and early. Mrs. Reeves, the headmaster's assistant, ushered Nala into her office at 7:15 a.m. We'd normally do this a week before classes started, but it wasn't possible under the circumstances. The job offer had come 3 days earlier, barely a fortnight since Mademoiselle Leblanc, Thornton's previous French teacher, had a heart attack and died in her sleep. Well, Nala shuddered. Not exactly in her sleep. She shook her head, dislodging the image of her predecessor's brief and alarming middle of the night awakening. That's okay. I'm an early riser, Nala fibbed. Did Jerry get you moved in okay? Was everything ready for you? Yes, he was very helpful. Jerry, the custodian, had shown her to her suite in the girls' residence yesterday evening. He'd hung around, giving her an extended tour of the kitchenette's supplies, a Noah's Ark of matched pairs of glasses, cutlery, and plates, and she'd wondered if he was flirting with her. He reminded her of Tom Selleck with his genial smile and playboy mustache. To get him to leave, she'd had to walk to the door, open it wide, and say goodnight. good. We had him do a deep clean and a fresh coat of paint. The place really needed it. Did you know that Sylvie LeBlanc, may she rest in peace, had lived there for 25 years? He told me, but it looks brand new now. This was mostly true, but when Nala had unpacked and settled in, she'd sensed Mademoiselle Leblanc's lingering presence. A solitary long gray hair had trapezed from the showerhead, slipping into her bath water. A perfect ring, where the older woman must have placed her glass each night, stained the bedside table. One of the mugs in the cupboard held a faint taupe lip stain. Glad to hear it. Now, here's your offer letter. Look it over, sign it, and then we'll do a quick tour. Nala read through the 2-page document, the terms of which Headmaster Lowry had discussed with her over the phone. Teaching French to grades 7 through 13 and being a residence monitor. She signed and dated the sheets while exhaling a barely audible Alhamdulillah. A bell rang and Nala startled. Mrs. Reeves said, "That's the second morning bell. It's kind of the hurry up and get dressed warning. Don't worry, you'll start tuning out the bells." Mrs. Reeves stood and gestured for Nala to follow. They did a power walk tour through the building, Mrs. Reeves pointing out science labs, classrooms, and offices. Nala retained only half the information, distracted by the tall leaded windows, pointed arches, and vaulted ceilings. The school was grand, but also cool and uninviting, as though it begrudged its visitors. Now I'll skip ahead just a bit. Your classroom is in what we call the attic. Mrs. Reeves swung open a heavy wooden door, and they climbed a steep and slightly uneven staircase, emerging into a large open space with slanted ceilings. Sunshine radiated through the stained glass windows, beaming blue, red, and yellow diamonds across the white walls. Caught off guard by the beauty, Nala murmured, "Saira, charmant." Her brain cranked out Arabic and French before landing on her third language. "It's charming." So that's her.
We do have a couple of questions in the chat. The first one's from Vina. What was different about writing a young adult book versus the novels, and what was similar?
Thank you, Vina. I was trying to figure that out through the whole course of the writing of it. But there's a couple things. So you have to kind of try to remember what it was like to be 16. And for me, what I remember was that the world felt so wide open, and yet my own world was still pretty small, because it takes time and experience to have an understanding of the complexities of the world. So it's both this kind of wide open but sheltered kind of perspective. And of course, someone like Lisa, who has been kind of neglected and has seen more of the world, would have a wider view than someone like Zahabia, who has had a much smaller, sheltered view of the world. And what I mentioned earlier was that the advice I'd gotten from a workshop was to make sure that the young people are at the center of the problems and their solutions as well. So those are a couple things. Yeah. Thanks, Vina.
Yeah, that was a great question. Oh, got another one from Shani. Am I saying that right? Does being a psychologist? Yeah, psychologist. Does being a psychologist influence the writing of your characters, or help you to order cause and effect in the stories?
So I'm a psychotherapist, and what I've often said about that is that, like, I'm swimming in emotions all the time in that work. And so I think it helps me to write the emotions, the emotional dialogue. I don't know about cause and effect. Most writers are great observers of the world, and so are, paying attention to all the stuff just in a slightly different way. But probably I have a little bit of a leg up because of the emotional worlds I tread in all the time.
Yeah, I would think so too. And we've got a third one from Imtiaz. Your stories really reflect the diversity of our world. What's the message you are trying to impart in your stories?
Well, for me, like I said before, it's just, this is the world that I live in, and I want to make sure that the fiction that I write reflects the world that I live in. And so often it doesn't. So even and I try not, so I've had feedback in the past that sometimes I'm a bit didactic with this, but I want to make sure that what we're talking about, these really serious issues, these nuanced issues, sometimes these funny issues, right, are complex the way real life is complex. I think that like a lot of people, fiction has the power to change the world, right? It deepens our empathy about people and experiences we've never known or experienced ourselves, right? And we need a lot more empathy in this world, that's for sure.
We absolutely do. So we're just going to assume, I'm going to assume that everybody who's on this call, there's 45 people still here from beginning to end, they're going to read this book. Where should they go next in terms of your other 6 books?
That's a nice question. No one's asked me that one before. Well, I guess any of the fiction. Stealing Nasreen was my very first novel, so I think of it as my baby book. It's got a lot of freshness because I never imagined it would get published. I have found that the publishing world has been much more in my brain with each book as I got more self-conscious in the writing. But the second novel, 6 Meters of Pavement, which is like now 13 years old, is one that many people, including my friend Sil, who's on the call, has said was her favorite. I don't know. I mean, I love them all. They're still nodding.
Oh, I know. You can't choose one of your babies. Absolutely not.
It's so hard, right? Each of them have like a different meaning. All inclusive, Allison says. If you want a sexy book, that's all inclusive. It has a lot.
Notes. I'm taking notes for myself. 13 years. 13 years. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So as promised, we're going to do this drawing. And there were a lot more pre-registrations in this lemonade picture than there are here right now. So we're going to pick and see.
Oh, I'm just going to say Christine.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Chronologically.
Christine, I want you to unmute yourself and tell us why.
See if Christine's willing.
Because I did that, so I think it's valuable to see the trajectory of Farzana's writing because each book is very different. So I'm just be like me and read them in chronological order.
I like that. That's great. Oh, David could not get into the Zoom. Okay, that's good to know.
If you pick David, we'll watch him with Al.
So here's what we're doing. So we're picking 4 names. 2 of them are going to receive signed copies of the book, courtesy of ECW Press. And then somebody's going to receive a t-shirt, a City Books t-shirt, and then someone will receive a City Books tote bag. And I will announce what you're going to win before I read the name. And then I will contact you tomorrow because I've got your name and your email addresses. And we'll work out the logistics of getting you that gift. Okay. So the first signed copy of the book goes to Alexandria Guerra. Are you here, Alexandria?
Alex is my new sister-in-law.
Oh,
Hi, right here.
oh, you are. Congratulations.
Yeah,
Okay, you're
yeah,
getting a
thank
signed
you.
copy of the book.
So excited.
Yay! With the cute dog.
Yes.
I was watching the dog tonight too.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, that's great.
Okay. Oh, yeah, the dog likes it too. Okay, second signed book tonight, pen all over my fingers, is, I apologize in advance, I'm not going to get this right. Isha Majara?
It's Majara. Yeah.
Majara? Okay, that's the second signed book here
Thank you.
tonight. Isha?
Did you make it?
Okay. Pre-registered will catch us on the replay for YouTube. Okay. Okay. Now the shirt, when I contact you, you'll have your choice of colors and sizes. We've got multiple shirts at City Books. Ryan, name? No? Is that your partner? That's your partner. It's gonna get a t-shirt.
It's going to start to feel like this is like rigged, but yeah.
Well, you know everybody on the chat, right? So it is sort of rigged. They're all gonna, well, not, you don't know everybody, but I know there are people who signed up from TikTok, but I don't see any of them. I don't see many in the group. If you linked in here from TikTok, can you identify yourself in the chat? Because I didn't see everybody's name who came through. It's a book. I'm writing down who's getting what. Okay. This is a shirt.
I hope everyone follows Arlen on TikTok and Instagram. She posts reels every day about stuff that happens in her bookstore.
Hey, Kate, I did see you come in. Yeah, I'm glad you're still here. Okay, and so then this is the a tote bag to Jillian Rogerson.
Yay, Jillian Rogerson.
Oh, and Jennifer, you did too. Hey, thanks. Okay.
That's nice. I'm
Thank you for the tote bag. That's great. And
yeah,
congratulations, Farzana. I can't wait to read the book.
Thank you so much.
Okay, everyone. Thank you, everybody, for your patience in the beginning while we got everybody inside.
Do we want to do one more question, or what do you think, Arlen? What's your sense?
Does somebody else have a question?
Yeah, Eddie has a question.
Yes, go ahead. I missed that one come through.
How does your work in social justice and activism influence your work? Do you try to avoid letting your work become a megaphone for your beliefs and causes? If so, how? So I would say I don't try to avoid talking about any of the issues in the work, because I think fiction can change the world. But it is a trick to not have the work feel like a megaphone, because nobody wants to read that, right? Or some people like to read, I shouldn't say that. But like for me, what I'm trying to do is write a book that is enjoyable, entertaining, a page turner, right? Because that's what I like to read. But I want to infuse the social justice issues in there so that, people have an opportunity to feel those things. Yeah. And I know, Eddie, you do the same thing.
Yeah,
That's
that's
a
right.
really,
That's why
really
I
good
asked
question.
that question, Farzana, is because it's something that I contend with myself. I'm also a writer, and I also have a lot of beliefs and a lot of causes, and so
Good.
much of my experience has been informed by those beliefs and causes. And so I think it's very difficult to prevent that from surfacing in my work, because it's so, such a part of me and my DNA. But I often contend with, how do I do it in a way that's nuanced, and whether I should be viewing my work as something of a megaphone or a platform to, voice these issues. So it's something that is often on my mind. But I appreciate that perspective, Farzana, and you do it masterfully, I must say.
What's that?
And you do it masterfully.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. Everything is political, right? So there's no problem with our fiction being political too. Yeah.
Oh, I agree. And I think it would be weird if it weren't.
Mm.
I mean, don't get me wrong, there's some writing that is not political. It's not really meant to be political. But I think if you're writing something that's realistic, it's hard to ignore some of the things that we're all really going through in life.
Yeah.
And even if you're writing fantasy and science fiction, I mean, you're still writing about those issues. Everything is political. How can it not be? Yeah. Wow. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to register and to stick around. And that's my 8 o'clock alarm. To ask really thoughtful and for supporting Farzana. I mean, look at this community that you've built. It's really pretty amazing.
Thank you, everybody. And if you feel like unmuting and having a chaotic, good
Yes.
love, because, we're doing this over our screen.
Yay!
Yay!
Yay, Farzana! Let's have some chaos!
Congratulations.
Woohoo.
I love the chaos of that. Thank you.
That's great.
It's lovely to see your faces, lovely to see your names, lovely to see your questions.
And if any of you don't know, if any of you are strangers and you came in here because you found your way through Instagram or you found your way through the City Books TikTok page, Farzana can be reached via email. And why did that come out? Farzana Doctor, what's the last 416?
Yep, at gmail.com or through social
gmail.com.
media at Farzana Doctors. Yeah.
Yeah, and at Farzana Doctor. So also you can reach out to me and I can put you in touch as well. And her website has contact information on it as well.
If anyone's interested in any other events, we are having an in-person launch in Toronto, October 1st at 7. And all that information is on my website and on social media and everything, if anyone is in Toronto and wants to come.
All right, everyone, feel free to get in touch with me. Feel free to get in touch with Farzana. It was a really wonderful evening. Thank you so much for asking City Books to be a part of this. I'm really excited to be a part of this book, and I was excited to get to know you via 7 as well.
Thank you so much for all your hard work, Arlen.
Oh, you're welcome. Good night, Cassie. Good night, Eileen. Good night, Eddie. Good night, Sil. Good night, everybody. Good night, Kate. Good night, Jennifer.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Wonderful.
Bye.
And congrats again, Farzana.
Oh, thank you so much. Lovely to see you all.